As a healer in the Elder Scrolls Online, your weapon bars are generally going to consist of a restoration staff and a destruction staff. Unless you're one of those stamina healers, I think there's like 6 of you out there. I'm just kidding. But for the most part, it's generally going to consist of a restoration staff and a destruction staff. As I'm sure many of you know, these destruction staffs come in 3 elements, that being fire, ice, and lightning. A question I see a lot from new players or even just new healers is, which element should I go with? Does it even matter? Well, don't you worry, my friend, because my name's Doc and I'm here to answer that question for you right now. Right off the bat, I'd actually like to start with the lightning staff, as I have to give a little bit of a history lesson over why this whole video is even a discussion to begin with. See, for a long time in the history of ESO, lightning staffs were almost always what a healer would use as their destruction staff. The reason being is that not too terribly long ago, the champion point system looked much different than it does today. Under the ritual tree, they had different trees back then other than just green, blue, red. You would have found the exploiter perk. This allowed all players to do 10% more damage to enemies who were off-balanced. This meant that a healer using a lightning staff could use the elemental blockade skill to proc a free 10% damage debuff on enemies who were concussed. Flash forward to March 2021 when Champion Point 2.0 was released. While many of these old perks did make a return in 2.0, a lot of them were turned into slottables. And as I'm sure all of you know, you can only have 4 slottables per tree at one time. This means that people have to be a little more tactical with their choice of perks, and while Exploiter does still exist today, it was turned into a slottable. All of that to say that many of the top DPS builds today don't utilize Exploiter as one of the perks, meaning that lightning staffs aren't an automatic requirement for healers. That being said though, a lot of healers do still run lightning staffs on their back bar, and for good reason. The lightning status effect is called concussion, and it's a bit of burst damage that applies minor vulnerability to enemies for 4 seconds, which will increase their damage taken from all sources by 5%. Obviously, this is a solid debuff to have on an enemy, and yes, while many DPS builds don't utilize Exploiter, there are some that still do. However, like we mentioned, lightning staves aren't necessarily the default pick anymore, so let's talk about our next set of staves, the Inferno staves. I won't linger too terribly long on Inferno staves because I'd say generally this is going to be the last choice for a healer as a destruction staff. The status effect you afflict with the Inferno staff is called Burning, and I will give you 3 guesses as to what it does. That's right, it burns your enemies. In all seriousness though, Burning is basically just a little bit of extra damage over time for 4 seconds. This is great for my DPS players out there, but not so much for us healers. Now, I don't want you to think that you can never use an Inferno staff. Any damage is good damage, and I could actually make the argument that in a dungeon scenario where healers will generally be focusing a bit more on dealing damage, that Inferno staves are excellent choices. In a trial setting though, you may get some funny looks for whipping out a fire staff, but I don't think it would be so bad that you can't be a good healer with one. Not much to say about the Inferno staff. I think, it's okay. It's fine. Next, and finally, let's talk about the Ice Staff. So this bad boy is sort of the new kid on the block for us healers. When healers talk about what element should I use, they usually mean, should I swap my lightning staff to an ice staff? The reason for this being that the ice staff used to be a pretty much tank exclusive elemental type. This was because the Tri-Focus Destruction Staff passive would make it so the Ice Staff could taunt an enemy to you with a heavy attack, and blocking used magicka instead of stamina. Obviously, being able to taunt an enemy without having to use a skill, pretty huge. Trifocus, though, has since been changed, where instead of a taunt, a heavy attack now applies a damage shield, and it keeps the magicka blocking. So tanks do still enjoy using the Ice Staff, but now healers don't have to worry about accidentally taunting a boss if they happen to throw out a heavy attack. This is especially notable, for like Rojo builds, Roaring Opportunist, Yorvold's Guidance, where heavy attacks are required. So definitely that was a big change there. So on top of already, now you don't have to worry about taunting an enemy to you, you also have the status effect from the Ice Staff. And this is something. This is really good. I mean, just like all the utility that I'm about to go over. So the status effect is called Chilled, and this will apply Minor Maim and can apply Minor Brittle for 4 seconds. Minor Maim reduces the amount of damage an enemy does by 5%, and Minor Brittle increases the amount of critical damage an enemy takes by 10%. Considering how many damage builds are focused on crit damage, Minor Brittle can be a huge buff to your team's damage. Now, it's not like super easy to proc Minor Brittle from Chilled. However, classes like Necromancer and Warden are very good at doing that. So, I think already the Ice Staff gains a little bit of a bonus for those classes in particular, if that happens to be, your particular class. Even beyond that, the Elemental Blockade skill has a very unique interaction with Ice Staffs, where upon casting Elemental Blockade, it will grant a projectile shield, snares, and also reduces the armor of chilled enemies. All of these things make Ice Staffs a great choice for not only tanks, but now healers as well. The question remains though, which one is best? I've covered all of them, so what is the answer? Well, before I answer that, I'd like to thank the sponsor of today. No, I'm totally kidding. I'm just messing with you. I'm totally kidding. Personally, while I think you'd be fine with any of the 3 stabs, I'm gonna have to give it to the Ice Staff. The Inferno Staff, despite being great for settings where you need to inflict more damage, just simply doesn't have the utility that the other 2 elemental types are going to bring. When it comes to the Lightning Staff, I think it's a great choice if you're running in an optimized group who can make use of things like Concussed or Exploiter. However, in random groups, I think it falls short for just a few reasons. The first is that, like we mentioned, Concussion will apply Minor Vulnerability. While Minor Vulnerability is great, there are also 4 different classes that can apply Minor Vulnerability with class skills. 2 of those classes are Nightblades and Wardens, which just so happens to be the top healing classes in the game right now. In fact, I believe one of the best in slot skills for Wardens is actually the skill that applies Minor Vulnerability, so you're not really gaining anything from that. Next is that while the Exploiter perk is still used in some builds, I'd rather not dedicate my entire Destruction Staff to proccing a status effect that may not even be doing anything for my teammates. Finally, the utility that the Ice Staff brings is just unmatched. The magicka blocking and the damage shields alone make this thing worth it for me. Without even talking about things like Minor Brittle, let's just talk about those damage shields for a second, right? Yeah, sure. In a perfect world, the tank would never go down, and you'd never need to block. While I'm fortunate enough to say that my friends who I run trials with have awesome tanks, I also run a lot of dungeon pledges with match-made groups. Sometimes during those dungeons, tanks go down, or we may even get a fake tank, so you gotta block to stay alive. Again, right? Without even talking about Minor Brittle and all that, just the blocking alone, just the damage shields, just the projectile shields alone is worth it for me, right? Now, obviously, if you only ever play this game with a completely perfectly optimized group, then, make the decision that's best for you, right? However, I do think that in terms of running with random people, the Ice Staff is just great. It's just great. It helps you stay alive, which in turn helps you keep your teammates alive, and that's always a good thing. All of that to say, though, that at the end of the day, you can run whatever elemental staff you feel comfortable with. If you already have a lightning or a fire staff, don't feel pressured to swap over to ice. The difference between them isn't so much that I think you should stress yourself out over which one is best. To be honest with you, I actually use all three in various scenarios, I may bring a fire staff into a dungeon. I may bring a lightning staff into a trial. I may bring an ice staff into PvP. It just depends on what I'm doing and with what class I'm doing that thing with. Besides, the meta may shift in a year or two, or we might see another rework to a widely used healing skill, meaning we might need something like minor vulnerability again. I don't know. Who knows? This was more just for fun and just to kind of discuss and give my advice, since I've seen the question posed a bit in the community lately. So hopefully this video may reach some people who are curious about it. Either way, I hope you enjoyed the video and let me know what you think. This will actually be the last video that I'll be posting before the new year. So when we return in 2025, I've got a ton of different videos lined up for you guys. I'm already working on projects that are going to be out, later this month. So we've got a whole bunch of stuff lined up. I'm really, really excited. As well as some other things that aren't video related that I'm kind of working on right now. So we'll see, we'll see how everything goes. Either way though, I think 2025 is going to be a good year for me, for the channel. And more importantly, I hope it's a great year for you guys as well. So I think all I've got left to say is that I've been Doc. Take care of yourselves, be good to others, have fun and safe celebrations, and I will catch y'all next year. Wow, I can't believe I just said that.